You know, summoners, sometimes the glory of Champion Select is not in picking what you wanted to pick, but instead picking what the enemy team doesn't want you to pick. Let's learn how to ruin some days in patch 10.5. Hey summoners, and welcome back to another episode of Pro Counters. As always, we are going to go over some picks that help you counter the meta, and this time for patch 10.5. Patch 10.5 has been mostly just readjusting some of the last patch's problems, so make sure to stay tuned because we're going to cover some unique counter picks across every single role. If you're trying to win some more games, you gotta be ready to counter the strongest, most popular champions. And for today's question of the day, what is your favorite matchup or favorite counter pick? For me, I really like playing Soraka support into Karthus jungles because I am extremely petty and I like to ruin people's fun. And guess whose ult cooldown is also lower? This guy. No global execute for you, dum-dum. Anyway guys, I really want you to check out ProGuides.com before we get started. We are always working hard to bring you the best content that we can. We have these awesome courses by your favorite streamers and pro players, and they will help you improve and climb. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on all of the information we put out for you. Between our website and our YouTube channel, we have everything you need to reach your 2020 ranked goals right at your fingertips. And with all that being said, let's get into the video. Starting off in the top lane, our first counter pick will be Illaoi, and that's because she's in a really good spot due to some bone breaking. A lot of the top lane picks are not very mobile right now, and as a juggernaut, Illaoi loves champions that can't dodge. Her tentacle smash does a big line of damage to any enemy standing in it, and then she can follow up with her W to smack them again with the help of all the nearby tentacles that she's able to spawn. And she can grab their soul to add some extra damage to the equation. And as you probably know by now, if the enemy jungler tries to gank and relieve the pressure, Illaoi's ult makes it a 1v2 and a pretty ideal situation for her. She can dish out the wrath from hands and tentacles alike, and she's the last one standing. In this vein, Illaoi thrashes champions like Aatrox and Jax, and if she's ever showed up at Set's fighting pits, he'd be in trouble too. For Trundle, his recent buffs have put him into such a renaissance. While Trundle is a spotlight meta pick in the jungle, in the top lane he's a little bit more dependent on the matchup. He does have a good kit after all for the top lane, so it's not surprising to see him there from time to time. His passive gives him a decent amount of sustain in lane, and his trades are very difficult to match. His Q is an auto attack reset that chunks an enemy, slows them, and steals some of their attack damage. His W raises his own attack speed and movement speed to help him run them down, and then if he needs to lock down a play, he can use his pillar to block off an exit or to create his own. Trundle is most known for his ultimate, which drains defensive stats and makes him a great anti-tank. To that end, Trundle has a lot of success against healthy champions like Garen and Set. He's able to outtrade them over extended periods of time. But he's not limited to just fighting tanks though. He can also go toe-to-toe with champions like Aurelia and Tryndamere, since his Q lets him steal their AD, and then he can disengage with a pillar once the fight becomes even. Poppy is one of those tanks that does an absurd amount of damage and makes you question the ideology behind tank balance. But she's always being relegated to a counter pick in some ways, so I guess it's okay-ish. However, with Riot's recent decision to increase the jungle pool, also came a decent buff for Poppy's Q damage to monsters, making her jungle clear a bit faster and healthier. Poppy can lay the smackdown with her hammer and do a pretty good chunk of damage at the moment of impact and then after a short delay once again. Her most important ability that makes her what she is though is her W, which not only prevents dashes in an area around her but also grounds the offending champion. She can also tackle people for a stun and blast the enemy team into the sunset Team Rocket style, but the W is what makes her a specific counter. Champions like Lee Sin, Elise, and Zac are just straight up prevented from doing what they need to do in her W, and for Graves, being grounded is as good as death if Poppy has teammates around. She's a great counter pick when you need to nullify any engage potential, so give her a whirl. Rammus is one of those champions that's always been an okay pick, but he's exceptionally useful against high damage auto attackers. After the recent buffs to Bami's Cinder, he's doing pretty well for himself in the jungle. Actually, a little too well. In fact, and in 10.5, Riot decided to give him a slap on the wrist and lower his attack speed. Despite this, he's still ballin' like nothing even happened. His Q is a very good ganking tool, his W makes him extremely tanky with its armor and MR steroid, and his E makes sure that those big scary auto attackers are being used on him, and his W's built in Thornmail instead of one of his carries. His ult does some pretty okay damage over time, but it's really all about the taunt and Thornmail combo. Master Yi and Graves will eventually kill themselves on your pointy shell, Kha'Zix can't get onto your backline, which is much less harm to you, and Olaf's sustain becomes pretty meaningless. Someone go ahead and note the time and date. Seriously, I'm going to say something I've never said before and I'll probably never say it again, but that I'm happy to see Garen right now. Garen has found himself being a great counterpick in the mid lane at the moment. It's his ability to run down the squishy assassins and force them to play the quiet game while he does his best Beyblade impression. If they manage to survive that, then he drops an execution on them from the sky. Even if they try to fight back, the defensive stats on his W are very hard to overcome, and his passive's out of combat healing keeps him in lane. Pretty big brain stuff if you ask me. Garen annoys me, but assassins annoy me even more, so I will gladly welcome this necessary evil. If you want to win, you can pick Garen into flashy melee squishies with high damage and mobility. Things like Yasuo, Sylas, Katarina, Zed, Fizz, Kassadin. They can zip around all they want, but they'll only die tired. Gare Bear don't care. In that same line of thinking, Pantheon mid has a very similar functionality to the Garen counterpick, but with the added bonus of being able to use his ult and affect the side lanes. In the early game, he at least feels a little bit more fun than Garen as well, and since it's pretty difficult to dodge a point-and-click ability, he can outtrade almost any melee assassin with his targeted stun, followed up by his E to block damage, and put out more of his own damage with a rapid flurry of spear stabs. As they hobble away, a well-aimed spear toss can execute them and then seal the deal. Aside from dealing with picks like Yasuo, Sylas, Fizz, and Kassadin with ease, Pantheon is also a good pick into Vladimir and Twisted Fate. He's a rough time for Vlad because he can actually get onto Vlad frequently enough to punish him out of lane and then go create leads elsewhere so Vlad doesn't have time to scale. He beats Twisted Fate because his E can block the stun card and his ult has the same cooldown as TF's ult at level 1, so he can very easily follow TF anywhere throughout the laning phase and prevent him from doing his one main job. It has been a while since we've seen the Cogster, but Kog'Maw is a champion despite not seeing much of since the meta shifted to be more early game oriented, and especially with Enchanters getting kneecapped a while back, the tides are finally turning. Enchanters are on the come up, and so is Runeterra's hungriest battle shrimp. Under certain conditions, Kog'Maw is a premier protect the ADC carry, but he has to make it to late game. His Q shreds defensive stats, his W increases his range and lets him deal % health damage, and his E offers some self-peel while his R is a long-range execute damage artillery strike. He's an answer to ADCs that cannot harass him very well on their own, like Xayah, Misfortune, and Ezreal. Sivir will push him under turret, which means he can farm up and scale with no danger of being ganked, and on a weird note, Kog'Maw doesn't really counter Lucian in lane, but as long as he gets out of lane with a minimal CS deficit, he will hard outscale and crush the game. Do you remember back in patch 8.11 when Riot nerfed ADCs into unplayability so people started playing Ziggs bot lane? Well, he's still pretty good into certain lanes. Ziggs has long range poke and some of the best zone control and wave clear in the game. Throw in almost any global huge ultimate that does a ridiculous amount of damage, and you can see how a lot of people think he's pretty irritating to deal with. Plus, people don't really talk about it, but his Satchel Charge's ability to execute towers is highly underrated in a world with turret plating gold. He outranges Ezreal's poke, he can bully almost every ADC without a dash, and the ones that do have dashes will have to wade through a minefield to get to him. In addition, his Satchel Charge can also interrupt MFs and Kate's ultimates, making for some very clutch outplays that you can throw in your montage. It's pretty weird to see Sona where she actually belongs instead of getting abused for some other strat. I wonder if Riot knows. Anyway, we're glad to have her back in the bottom lane. Patch 10.4 saw some pretty substantial nerfs for Sona to get her out of the top lane, but since Riot stopped support items from going to solo lanes by requiring an ally present to use them, they decided to revert the nerfs and give her the stats back so she wouldn't be harmed in her actual role. Sona is a well-rounded enchanter pick with a lot of AoE buffs for her team in the form of damage, healing and shields, movement speed, and an on-demand dance party. Plus, she has the option to build AP if she needs to go for more damage, or if she just wants to KS, who knows. Her poke cooldowns are too low for Morgana and Soraka to deal with in lane, and Tahm Kench does not have a hard engage tool so she can just bully him too. We haven't seen Alistar back in the meta for a long time, and while he still isn't quite there, he is a pretty valuable counterpick towards some of the more popular champions that we do see a lot of. Patch 10.5 saw a buff to Alistar's base health and passive healing. Alistar has a good mix of engage, disengage, and peel, so if you play him it makes sense if you need to keep a hyper carry alive. If Leona jumps on your carry, you can interrupt it with your Q or E, or you can go knock away her carry and then turn on her with your carry. The same thing can go for Nautilus. Yuumi is easy for the cow because his ult nullifies hers, and there's nothing she can do to stop him from getting on her carry outside of a meager slow. Blitzcrank is being picked a good bit right now as a counterpick to the other enchanters, but Alistar loves nothing more than getting into a fight, so Blitzcrank has to curve his hook around the 1,000 pounds of bovine, or risk getting melted down and turned into a cowbell. Anyway, all jokes aside, thank you guys very much for watching another episode of Pro Counters. Make sure to like our videos and leave comments as well as any feedback that you have for us. Once again though, check out ProGuides.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we are constantly uploading new content to help you guys improve. Until next time, best of luck on the Rift, and we will see you all in the next video.